Alrighty, so today, as I said, we're talking about occupational health and safety and talking about some of those critical events and some debriefing and that might go along with it. And as I said, it's really about just getting you to think about what might be some of the occupational health and safety issues that you might experience on placement, and then how do you manage those. And so, you know, we know, I mean, you guys know, bloody third year Bachelor of Health Science students, that, you know, safety in the workplace really starts with us. And it's a public health issue. Some of you have probably done the subject work and health. Is that right? Yeah. So you might have covered some of this stuff in terms of occupational health and safety, some of the legislation and that. Is that right, Claudia? Yep. So that might sort of help us to have some of the conversations today. So I imagine that most of you, if not all of you, are currently employed or have been in the past. What are some of the occupational health and safety policies that exist within your workplaces? This is where I'm going to open it up to you. What are some of the things that you're aware of?
Well, just recently, they've made it mandatory in the aged care that I work at that all employees wear masks.
Yeah, I think certainly with COVID, we've seen some changes in terms of occupational health and safety requirements. Yep. Good. What else, Kate? What else are you aware of, even before COVID?
They go through certain modules you have to complete on lifting and correct cleaning, because a lot of the employees clean clients' houses and also in the hostel. So they're making sure that's all up to a high standard, so you're not putting yourself in danger.
Yep. Good. What about others?
At Repco, there's a lot of safe listing procedures, and you know, there's a lot of chances for things to drop on your feet. So there's exclusion zones marked on the ground where, you know, if you're in there, only one person can be in there, and a lot of procedural stuff, even a lot of ladders going up the shelves. So you have to, there's modules on how to use a ladder. You can't use a ladder until you've passed.
Yep. So Lockie, did you have to have an induction?
Yeah. So before we started, it was like I think it was about a 10-page OH&S and then expectation document.
Yep.
They had to be finished before we were allowed to have our first shift.
Yeah, great. Ali, you've worked in security. What sort of policies? I'd imagine that there'd be some pretty important OH&S.
Yeah, fair bit OH&S policies. So for example, a couple of years ago, I used to work at a job site as a security guard. So it was like a 12-hour shift at like a solar panel farm in Merkel. It's like the largest solar panel farm they built.
Yeah.
And one of the safety procedures was, even though you're not working as a tradie or like construction site, you still got to wear a helmet. And if you drive a car around, you got to put the light on. You got to have a torch with you. You got to wear a high-vis vest. You got to wear boots. Like you're in the middle of nowhere, you still got to wear boots just for your safety.
Yeah.
And yeah, these are some of the OH&S safety.
Great. Yeah, good. Could I just ask somebody to email Isabella the link for our Zoom meeting? I can just see she's tried to join in the other one. Thank you. Thanks, Ali. So it's really important whenever we're entering into a new workplace, whether that's as a student on placement or whether it's as an employee, that you're provided with some sort of OH&S induction. Now, Kate, Dale and Ali, or not necessarily so much Ali because you weren't there yesterday, but you had an induction yesterday. What were some of the OH&S policies and procedures that were covered in your induction?
Yes, obviously we did this is sort of new, I guess, is sort of like the hand hygiene practices on when you need to conduct hand hygiene. So
Yep.
that was one that we went over. It was also like your workspace and stuff like that. So like cords being from computers in a safe space, that they've been tested and tagged, that computers and like benches and chairs are Australian safety standard, and reporting methods on reporting faulty items or areas that need to be assessed. So that was sort of the things that were mentioned yesterday.
Yep. Great.
And yeah, we just sort of went over a checklist on, seeing as that you have to work from home, we sort of got given a checklist on making sure that, our home area where you'd be doing placement from is to a OHS standard. So that was sort of the things we covered yesterday.
Yeah, great. I was going to ask about the working from home situation, whether they had a policy to cover that. So that's great, because I imagine that lots of organisations, if they didn't already have that, are having to do that now in response to the pandemic. And so each of you should be provided with an induction in relation to OH&S. And for those of you who are doing remote placements, it'll be important to ask, if they don't provide you, is to ask them about their working from home policy and procedures. Because, the OH&S still applies even if you're working from home. They still have an obligation to be protecting your health and safety. So do check with them when you sort of start placement about that. All right, so let's think about, COVID has sort of changed our world in many, many, many ways. And it's making us think about, occupational health and safety in a whole range of settings. What do you think are some of the measures workplaces have put in place? I mean, we've just heard from Dale about some of the things that are happening at Community Health Bendigo. But what do you think other workplaces might have done in terms of protecting OH&S in different settings? And given what we're seeing play out in settings like, the aged care sector, in, retail and hospitality, what we're seeing in terms of that retail space, like Bunnings, for example. The first thing when I saw some of that footage coming out over the weekend was about, the occupational health and safety of those workers, and people refusing to wear masks. What are some of the things that you guys have picked up on?
Well, for us, we have the sneeze guards.
Yeah.
That would be one, but we've got them. And we also have to, it's kind of like an unspoken kind of rule. Like, I personally like to constantly clean them anyway, because also people still lean their head on them. I don't know why, but at our work, they like to lean their head on them. Some people
Really?
but yeah, well, I think because we've got
so gross.
Yeah, I know. That's why I like to clean them every hour. But because we've got some rules on on our bench, and I don't know, so they must want to read it, but then clearly the closer they get, the better they can read. No idea. But the screen guards are really big, because even because in Woolies, they've got it all in Woolies as well. They've got it everywhere.
Yeah. What else have you guys noticed?
Izzy, you guys are wearing masks now.
Yeah, we started wearing masks a couple of weeks ago, and if we don't wear them, we're not allowed to work.
Yep.
At the moment. And we're also sanitizing constantly now. We weren't doing it as much for a while, because we weren't doing it every few minutes, but now we're doing it every half hour.
Yeah.
Doing the rails, and we're getting mold. I work at an IGA, and we only have small screens at the moment, and we're getting bigger ones to go around all the registers, like most of the other supermarkets have, which is just taking it a while to get that all in place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Anyone else?
Sorry, I don't know if this is kind of one, but we've been told we have to frequently Dettol wipe or like clean the FPOS machines and stuff like that. And like our stations because we touch a lot of the computer things and like the things that we touch, we have to kind of constantly keep Dettol wiping, cleaning those surfaces and stuff just to make sure, like, because we handle a lot of money, that as well. Like we don't have a box for the money that I've seen on the news, but like they just want to keep us cleaning our stations.
So you haven't moved to, like contactless payments?
Nah, we don't see, our business doesn't see the point when if people have money, how else are they going to pay if they didn't bring their card or something like that? Like they don't want to exclude people for the way that they are paying currently.
Yeah. And particularly in rural towns too, I imagine that's an issue if you don't have access to banks and all the rest of it. So
yeah. And plus all of us really pay with cash. Like, I don't know if it's an unspoken rule, but yeah, everyone has cash.
Yeah.
I reckon that changes on where you live as well and what the current status of that shire is, because I know where you are, Nadine, a lot of it you'll be
Nobody's touching cash.
Yeah.
Nobody's even touching their cards to the reader at this point.
I find it interesting. A lot of people are wiping their cards before they hand it over, which I thought was kind of really nice. But then I was also like, poor you.
So I don't know. I mean, certainly where we are, and I mean, I don't leave the house a lot. It's like literally to buy food. But like when I go and see Izzy, I often go and see Izzy. You can just, it's one of those readers where you don't hand it over.
Yeah.
You just hover it. You don't even need to tap. I do wipe my card before I leave the house and when I get home. But not before I hand it over because I'm not handing it to anybody. So that might be a cultural thing as well.
Yeah, well, a lot of people try to hand it over to us. Well, me, I've kind of just gotten a habit of handing the FPOS machine kind of in their face. Well, not in their face, we've got the screen thing, but like, towards them. So then I can be like, that's for you.
Great. So hearing lots of things about looking after people's physical health and safety. What about mental health?
Uncovered. That's interesting. I'd really like to hear how that is for you guys. Frontline work.
Mm-hmm.
For my work, it's kind of interesting. My bosses, I work in Heathcote, so not in the hot zone like us, but they're kind of in denial. They don't seem to be taking it quite as seriously. They do the bare minimum of what they're required to do. There's no extra kind of...
That's totally how it was going here for a while. I was saying to Kat, you heard me. The people were like, I won't come here. It's Melbourne people. I'm like, yes, you know how the Melbourne people come for tourism every weekend. What do you think is coming with them?
Mm.
And that kind of messes with me a little bit because I'm going sort of above and beyond to make sure that things are safe, but they don't care.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Kate, you work in aged care. What's happening there in terms of looking after the mental health of workers?
They are doing appraisals at the moment, and they're also in the staff room. You don't really sit in the staff room anymore because there's only allowed 4 people, but you go in and out to get the keys to the cars and cleaning equipment and that sort of stuff. And they've got messages from clients on the board saying how good of work such and such has done, sort of, and not like they're letting employees come to them if they've got or they're having some problems, but they're also showing their employees that they're doing a good job, especially this time. And I get texts probably 3 days of the week saying how good of a job we're doing and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Were they doing that before, Kate?
The text, yes, but you can notice it's more up because the frequency of the texts are more because they probably understand it is a tough time.
Kate, can I ask, when you get those sorts of messages, what does that do for your mental health?
When you see that clients ask for you again, or they say you've done a really good job to your boss, it makes you feel pretty good, and that they say that.
Yeah.
It was like you're doing the right thing. So
Yeah.
and
Do
you're
you
not,
get to the point with like the text messages, for example, where if you're getting them multiple times a week, where it becomes a little bit disingenuous, or not? Like,
I think they mean it. So
yeah.
but for me personally, no, it's good to see, and I think I don't think they overdo it, but
Yeah.
yeah, they've been
So there's
pretty.
obviously some good intention behind it, and
I guess the intention is very important as well. It's like Jodie was saying, that feeling that people care, or in the case of her bosses don't, is really important.
yeah,
So you feel supported as a worker.
yeah. Yeah, there was an email that we get. So one of the things that we get here at La Trobe is like an all-staff email around health and wellness. And there was some good intention behind one recently. However, the messaging was really poor. And I think it was titled, "Why Are You So Irritated?"
Oh dear.
And so there was this real sort of almost victim blaming, the reason why you're irritated is it's because it's your fault. And so while there was some good intention behind trying to unpack why people are irritated, it was the way that it had been titled just totally missed the mark. And even the Vice Chancellor came out and said, "I'm so sorry, that was so poorly handled." That sort of did nothing for people in terms of mental well-being. But interestingly, one of the things that came out, I think it was it yesterday, was staff are being given a day off on the 31st of August for a mental well-being day to do whatever they like. And if you can't take it on that day, so if it's not a day that you work or you've got other commitments on that day that you have to fulfill, that you can take it on any other day in August of your choosing, in negotiation with your line manager. So I thought that was actually a really nice touch. Like, it's not a lot, like it's one day. And people might say, "Oh, well, it's one day, we've been working, so many hours for so long now." But it was still a nice little acknowledgement.
At my husband's work too, he's got Friday off.
Yeah.
And they've actually started, because it's an American company, so they have like some extra layers of complexity going on in their workplace right now.
Yeah.
A lot of stress.
I bet.
They've actually started doing it every month, and they had originally said, we won't do it in months that have a public holiday, and in the US it was Labor Day this month, but they did.
Yeah.
And I can see that it's made a big difference, because he's so under the pump.
Yeah.
And there's so much, like with everyone, so much uncertainty and so much stress and so much political stuff. It's just, you need a goddamn day off.
Absolutely. All right. So these notes are actually up on LMS so that you can pull these up and have a look. There is a slide. I'm not going to go through this with you. In fact, the next two slides. This just highlights some of the occupational health and safety measures that La Trobe put in place. And in particular, it was in relation to Open Day. So ensuring that, they were looking after the safety of not only staff, but of also, volunteers such as students who often help out on the days, and also the visitors as well. So you can have a look. It's, looking at things like, looking at the hazards, electrical hazards, mechanical hazards, slips, trips and falls. That could be something that is an issue when you're on placement. And, what people could actually do. So making sure that, people reported any emergencies to security, making sure that people knew where the security office was located. So this is more specific to Bundoora, but, equally the same measures were put in place, at all of the campuses as well. So you can have a look at that, just some examples of what La Trobe does, in relation to those sorts of events. Okay, so on LMS, I'm conscious of time, and we might go a little bit over, as I said, I need to leave at 11, but we might go a little bit over. We can have a conversation around some of these questions. And in fact, I think we probably already have to some degree. Given there's only a few of us, we won't use breakout rooms. But why do you think you need to know about occupational health and safety? Why do you think you need skills in this area?
Maybe it's fundamentally know better, do better kind of stuff. A lot of these laws tend to evolve in response to things like repeated accidents.
Yeah.
Like with, for example, when Lockie was talking about ladder safety, you know, the attitude of, oh, it's just a ladder, but of course it's not. And there are ways to use a ladder safely and not use a ladder safely.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time, the occupational health and safety stuff comes because people have fallen off ladders or walked under ladders, or things have fallen on people's feet, or there've been injuries. So you kind of need those base skills so that you don't do that dumb stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, young and inexperienced workers make up a significant proportion of people who are either killed or injured at work. And often because, you know, they're either unfamiliar with that work environment, you know, they're not aware of the risks. Perhaps it's a new environment, one that they've not been in before. So they're not actually aware of what those risks are. Sometimes it's a lack of maturity, you know, that we can just sort of muck around and, you know, not thinking about the consequences of that. And then we know that they're also more susceptible to some, you know, more specific hazards, and less aware of their rights and responsibilities in relation to occupational health and safety, and being, you know, safe at work. And we've particularly seen some of these things in relation to sort of like apprentices, particularly in the trades, and some of the behaviour, that immature behaviour that goes on, sort of the mucking around, and then not being aware of their rights and responsibilities when it comes to some of these issues as well. And then the other thing is that they may not have the confidence to speak up about health and safety issues that are affecting them. And again, we've seen that particularly with apprentices in relation to things like workplace bullying, for example. You know, what if I lose my job? You know, I lose my apprenticeship. What happens to me? And so they're much more, you know, less likely to speak up. And Claudia, I was immediately thinking about your predicament in that other subject, you know, that not having that confidence to speak up, that those breaks, you know, you're potentially talking about an occupational health and safety issue is what we're talking about. Now, not necessarily a severe consequence of, you know, having long breaks or finishing later or being hungry, whatever, but nonetheless, it has some implications. And so, and because you're a younger student, you know, it's quite normal to not have that confidence to want to speak up about that. Okay. All right. Sorry.
Isn't it, Karen?
What was that?
The power thing again, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. It's about power. Yeah, absolutely. So when do you think orientation processes should begin?
The second you get the job?
Yeah, or before you start placement. So, you know, but
We're
really,
talking about placement, yeah.
Yeah, before you enter into the workplace. So, you know, normally it might take place before you start, or in some cases it might be within the first day or even the first week of, you know, when you begin that placement, or even if it is paid employment. And so we know that the likes of Dale, Kate and Ali and that have already had induction prior to starting, which is really the perfect time. Part of that process is just making sure that you're aware of your role, because, you know, you obviously have responsibilities, and so you need to be aware of what those are, but also what your rights are under occupational health and safety legislation, and including that you've got the right to be consulted about occupational health and safety matters that directly affect you. And it's really interesting to see that in many organisations that consultation actually doesn't happen. And it's certainly something that I've experienced in the past, where they make changes without any consultation with staff and the impact that it might have on them. It's also about making sure that you're aware of the obligation the employer has to ensure a healthy and safe workplace for you and fellow workers. And that might include things like, you know, personal and protective equipment, if that's appropriate, what to do in an emergency situation or in an evacuation. So, you know, where do you exit? Where do you meet up? Where are the emergency points? So making sure that you're aware of those. Making sure that you're aware about what a hazard is, and the potential hazard, the potential a hazard has to cause death, injury, or disease. How risks from workplace hazards are identified, how they're also assessed and controlled, and the role that you might have in identifying hazards. So, and if you do identify a hazard, how do you then go about reporting that? Who do you take that to? The reporting of occupational health and safety matters such as accidents, incidents and injuries, and that still applies even if you're working at home. Just because you might be working remotely doesn't mean that these things don't apply. And part of your responsibility is making sure that you have a workstation at home that is, ergonomic and safe, but also that, if there are accidents, incidents or injuries working at home, that you still report those, okay? Just because you're not on site doesn't mean that this doesn't apply to you. And then also making sure that you've got access to things like first aid and also that you know how to complete an incident report as well. And we've got some examples of incident reports on LMS that you can have a look at. And hopefully in your induction, you are given a copy or shown where to access those incident forms so that you know how to report a hazard or an incident if that should happen. Hopefully it doesn't, but you never know. And then also, sorry, part of that orientation process is also about, making sure that you're aware about what is appropriate behaviour for people in the workplace, what's inappropriate. So things obviously like violence and bullying are inappropriate. Any tools or equipment that you're not permitted to use. And activities that you must not engage in as well, because certainly as students there'll be things that you won't be allowed to do, so it's really important that you are aware of those. And the other thing that you need to be aware of is that you actually have the right to refuse to undertake work activities if you consider them to be unsafe, okay? And that can be really difficult, particularly if you're new to a workplace or if you're a younger person and you don't have that confidence to speak up. And as I said, one of the things that we'll be covering a bit later in this subject is looking at assertiveness and how to be assertive so that you can speak up if you are experiencing those sorts of things as well. And then finally, thinking about, you should be aware about how to communicate OH&S concerns to the workplace supervisor, but also letting us know as well. And then also making sure that you've been introduced to any relevant health and safety representatives within the organisation as well. So that should all be pointed out to you as part of that orientation process. Okay. So what do you think might be some of the potential workplace hazards that you might experience or could experience on placement?
Is this like on site or if we're at home?
Either. Because for many of you, your placement site is going to be your home.
Mm. Could it be, I don't know if this would be right though, could kind of it be like, if you are home, the distractions around you and how that could affect your work? I don't know if that's actually one, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if it might mean that, you're distracted and that has implications for the work that you do. So perhaps, sending out emails with incorrect information, for example. So not only, it's not necessarily a hazard for you, but it might be a hazard for a client or a colleague. So that could be. What else?
Looking after like your back health, so having the right chair or somewhere to sit.
Absolutely, yep. So that's where it's your responsibility to make sure that your workstation is ergonomically set up at home. It's your employer's responsibility to ensure that that's set up appropriately on site in the workplace. Yep.
And then mental health as well, yeah?
Say that again, Nadine.
I feel like mental health's a really big one.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the support that you get in the workplace is currently absent.
Personally, I look at OH&S in my own way. Correct me if I'm wrong, but OH&S for me, like, it personally means like being in that right mental state and like having that peace of mind and Because for me, like I kind of find it really hard to work and like do any assignments or work with people if I'm not in the right mental state, and if my mind's like all over the place, I won't be able to like focus or communicate or do anything correctly. So that's how I kind of personally look at OHS. I don't just look at it. I've got back problems as well. Like that's one of the main OHS safety that I need to look after, like the back posture and that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I definitely look at it like being in that the right mental space and having that peace of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the most common sort of hazards that you might be exposed to might be things like manual handling, probably less likely given the types of roles that you guys would have on placement. But that's not to say that there won't be manual handling, particularly, in the past where we've had students running events where they might have had to have, carried things to events, etc. That might be an issue. Slips, trips and falls. And that can happen at home just as easily as it can, in a workplace. Maybe machinery, the use of machinery, depending on the type of, placement that you're doing. Noise. So noise and vibration can certainly be an issue. So Claudia, the working at home thing, it could be the noise that's the distraction. Bullying and harassment, which can happen in all sorts of forms. It doesn't have to just be in the workplace. It could be happening in that online space as well. The next one probably relates, to some of what Ali was touching on, is the stress and fatigue, and those implications for mental health and being able to do your job well and safely. One that I'm experiencing, extended or excessive hours. That's a major issue, occupational health and safety issue. Probably explains why I've had a bronchitis for 4 weeks. Can't get rid of it. Ventilation, which could apply anywhere, like at home as well. So making sure that you've got good ventilation.
Holy smokes, right now, boys.
Sorry, say that again, Nadine.
Obviously less so at home, but for anyone who's in a workplace right now, ventilation is so important.
Yeah, well, one of the requirements for those who are having classes back on campus is that windows have to be left open in the classroom. And so, we're in the middle of winter, and we have to have windows open in classrooms. So yes, it is certainly an issue for those, who might be working in-house or on site. And then also think back to when we had the bushfires and, the issues around ventilation then as well. There might also be things like hazardous substances, maybe less of an issue working at home, depending on what substances you've got at home. Exposure to disease. Yeah, something that is playing on our minds, is front and center right now. Contact with electricity, and even things like dust exposure as well. Okay. So just quickly, when would you raise the question of occupational health and safety with your potential supervisors?
During induction?
Yeah, potentially, yeah.
I'd do it whenever I feel it's necessary.
Yep. Depends on what the question is, really. In your first meeting with them, they should be providing you with that information about occupational health and safety. If they don't, then you should ask for it. And then, you might raise questions around occupational health and safety if you, for example, have noticed, a particular hazard, or if you've just got a question about, a particular role or function or something that you're being asked to do or something that you've noticed. Then you should raise it really with them immediately. If there was an incident on placement, what would you do?
You would approach your supervisor first?
Yep, absolutely. And what else?
I think it depends what kind of incident. Because if it were something that involved an accident, you might need to, if it were severe, you might need to call 000,
Yeah.
You might need to fill out WorkSafe documents, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, fingers crossed, the only kind of incidents, hopefully we won't see any, but if we do, they're going to be of the, I'll go to my supervisor and this will be resolved in 10 minutes type, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
But if there were something serious, it might need to involve reporting.
Yeah, so the first person you should raise it with is obviously your placement supervisor, because that's the immediate contact, but you should also let us know.
Right,
well.
you did mention that in the induction subject.
Yeah, you need to let us know as soon as possible. Okay, and sometimes it might be that you that lets us know, sometimes it might be the supervisor that contacts us. So last year we had an incident where a student became unwell and passed out and an ambulance had to be called. And it was actually the supervisor that called us immediately to notify us that this was the situation and that the ambulance was on its way. And so that we could then go and meet that student at the hospital and make sure that they were okay. If it's something like a fall that you have, again, letting your supervisor know, because then you might be asked to complete an incident. In fact, you should be asked to complete an incident form, which just covers you and the organisation. And again, you should also let us know that you've had that as well, because then we can put in an incident report here, because you're also covered by the university for insurance purposes as well. Okay, so it is important that you are aware of what should happen, you know, if there is an incident, what you need to do, what your rights and responsibilities are. I'm not going to do this with you. You can have a look at this. So, you know, jump on and have a look at WorkSafe, have a look at the workplace laws and regulations that are in play within Victoria. Have a look again at the responsibilities that you have, but also the responsibilities of your employers as well, and also what their rights are, because they do have rights as well. Okay, so the reporting of critical incidents. What do you think might be some critical incidents that you could that could happen on placement, or that you might have experienced in your workplace previously? What are some critical incidents?
Bullying.
Bullying, absolutely. Anything else?
Harassment, I guess. Is that ties?
Yep, so bullying and harassment.
I always go to those other things, like the things where someone gets, like, you know, a limb amputated or burned. Like, you know, those big things, those are definitely critical incidents. Those have to be reported.
Absolutely.
I know I'm catastrophizing, but you know.
Yes, you're right. They are critical incidents, but also things like, you know, maybe you're walking along with a colleague who falls over, or maybe you know, and I've seen this at work, you know, somebody who trips going up or down the stairs. Maybe it's you or a colleague, you know, passing out, or feeling out of breath, having a potential heart attack. You know, and these are just these are things that I've actually experienced and have had to report while working at La Trobe. You know, I've seen, you know, people fall down the stairs. I had an incident last year where somebody tripped on a step going up and had actually grazed, you know, the top of their foot and their leg because of the tiles, and it was quite sharp. And so have to put in an incident report. I've had students have seizures in class, you know, and I've had to report that. I had a student who passed out from a known heart condition, and she used to do it to me all the time. It was always me who found it in different parts of the university. Multiple occasions I found this student passed out on the floor somewhere, you know, and I'd have to call security, call an ambulance and put in incident reports. Myself, I had, going back years ago, I had a student bail me up in my office and was verbally attacking me, threatening me, and throwing things in my office. And so I had to report those. So it can be, you know, it can be the littlest thing, or it can be, you know, Nadine's more extreme, you know, limb being amputated. So it's a whole gamut of things that, you know, we would consider a critical incident. And it doesn't matter how small or how large it is, we should actually be reporting it. Because if it's something that we think is just little, we don't know if this is happening often, or why, trying to understand why it's happening as well.
Like the tripping, for example,
Like
could be an indicator of maybe some neurological.
Yep. Or is it something to do with the floor surfaces, you know, if it's happening at work and a number of people have been experiencing it. So there's a potential hazard there.
I have a question relating to that.
Yep.
You know how you said that you reported it when that person grazed their leg, etc.
Yep.
But because they're conscious enough to report it themselves, how come you reported it?
I reported it because it was a student.
Ah, right, okay.
Now students, so if it happened at La Trobe, students can still report it. But because I witnessed it and I helped that student, I had an obligation to report it, even if that student didn't. Now that student still could have reported it, and so could I, and then it would be on record that we both have. But you know, often if you're the witness to something, you should report it regardless of whether the victim does or doesn't, because it needs to be brought to the attention of people. So for me, I just go, you know what, it's only going to take me a few minutes to fill out the form. Isn't it better to do the form, make sure that that person is covered? If for some reason later down the track, there was, you know, she developed a wound infection, or we actually found out that you know, that she had actually broken her toe, or something else had happened, that it might have only been, you know, a bit of a graze at that time, but we don't know what could have developed later on as a result of that. And so at least this way it was reported in the system. The occupational health and safety team can follow up with that student and make sure that in a day's time or in a week's time that they're okay. And if there was some further treatment that was required for that person, the university covers that, and it just protects that person. So yeah, if you witness it, report it. Okay. Now, your worksite should have a reporting form. There are some examples that we've put up on LMS that you can have a look at of different forms. And it's useful just to have a look. So when you start placement, you know, ask them to see what the form looks like. It might be online, it might be paper-based. Either way, ask them if you can have a look at it, just so that you're familiar with the types of information that they're going to ask you. So for example, on like the La Trobe one, you know, it asks you the location, the time, it asks you for any witnesses that were there, what happened. So just, you know, some basic information, and, you know, asks you what you were doing at the time, those sorts of things. So just be familiar with what sort of information they might be likely to ask you. And also, you know, what's the time frame for reporting? So I would generally report it as soon as I possibly can. But, you know, they might have other requirements around when you actually report. Okay. So have a look at those. Those examples are up on LMS for you. You can work through this. So there's a couple of worksheets on LMS. One is around debriefing after stressful events. So just gets you to think about a critical incident that might occur or that you might have experienced, and to reflect on why it happened and why it was critical, and then consider how you felt in that situation. So whether you were the victim or whether you're the witness. And because the other thing is that, you know, you have to document witnesses, because there might actually be consequences for witnesses in terms of psychological distress, for example. You know, so think about how you might have felt as if you've witnessed something versus if you're the actual victim. And then it gets you to interpret these events and then consider what you would do, what's your decision making around those. Okay. And then the other thing that's included for this week, which I won't go through, is there's some notes there and some videos around Kolb's experiential learning cycle. So it's one of the reflective practice models that you could actually use for your assessment. So you know, you have to choose two events to reflect on and two models. This might be one of those models. So Kolb's model really stems from education theory. and was first developed with teachers who used the model to reflect on and in practice. So if you're undertaking a, teaching, for example, using that model to reflect while you're in that process of teaching, but also afterwards, and then using that model to think about, well, what happened? What could I do differently? So it's based on that experiential learning, if you like it. So it stems back to education theory. But there's some videos that are in the notes, links to videos that you can have a look at, which explains it. And then there's the little diagram, and you can actually have a go at applying it. It's a really easy model.
It's not that different to Gibbs, or is it just me? Because when I went through this work, I was like, this just looks like a tweak on Gibbs. Like, it really doesn't look that different to me.
No, it's not that different. In fact, it's probably a little bit more simplified.
That's how it looked to me as well.
Yeah, there's only the 4
condensed it a bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not that different. In fact, you'll probably find that most of them are all fairly similar. I think Gibbs's is a much more detailed model. This is a much shorter, more simplified model for reflection. And it's really designed, to reflect on more sort of experiential experiences that you have, hands-on experiences, but still a really useful model, and one that you could actually use for that assessment task. Okay. All right. Before we finish up, because I need to get to this other meeting, there is no seminar next week, just so that you are aware. I think the plan is that students will catch up with their placement supervisors, although I think that applies more to Bundoora than you guys. So I think Emma will email you in regards to what the plan is for next week, but there's no Zoom session next week. Okay. If we'll be in touch with some of you about placements over the next week or two, paperwork will be sorted. Yeah, and that if you've got any questions that you can contact us. I saw Em set up Microsoft Teams and has sent through her mobile number and all of that. I'll actually reply to that and send through mine as well. So I'm around for another 4 weeks. So if you need anything, you know where I am. Okay. Has anyone got any questions, concerns, comments? No. Look at you all.
Well, we know you've got another meeting. Off you go.
Okay, I'm going. Lovely to see you all. Look after yourselves.
Thanks, Karen.
See ya. Thank you.
See ya.
See.
Bye, Karen.